What if the biggest test of leadership isn't what you build, but how you decide what deserves to last? We've all worked on pilot projects, the test runs before the real investment happens. Welcome back to Authenticity FM. I'm Corey Spiegel and delighted to be joined by my ever inquisitive co hosts, Mike Sable and Phil Corrali. Today, we're treating our own work as a pilot project and using this episode as a living laboratory. Together, we'll dig into decision theory to make sense of where we've been, discover what surprised us along the way, and talk out loud about where we might go next. Get ready for an authentic, sometimes chaotic, deep dive into how smart decisions actually get made. Let's get started. Okay, we need to start with the fact that this is episode 9. And what we learned in the last episode is we do a terrible job of actually inviting people to like, subscribe, follow. So thanks to Victor for teaching us that lesson. And we probably need to have a full disclaimer that there will be no wardrobe changes or Lions costumes or anything fun like that in this episode.
Although I do think we should throw some costume changes in every so often for good measure. So maybe not tonight, but let's hold off.
Totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not it. I volunteer as tribute.
Halloween is not that far off, and I just want to point out I have a whole box of stuff upstairs, so you never know.
Not it. Just quite simply not gonna happen. All right. So when we filmed episode 1, which was less than 2 months ago, which is kind of wild if you think about it, we had talked briefly about why we were doing this and started to touch on a little bit of the goals, but I will say for myself, I don't think I had a clear idea of what my goals were, other than I think this could be fun.
That sounds right. I'm quite sure I had no further goals other than that. Mike is muted. So the good news is this technology thing is really sticking. So that's good.
Okay, so for the podcast viewers out there, we do some editing, and so that was pretty funny because I was absolutely talking. It was the best thing I was going to say for the whole episode, and it's gone.
Shoot.
So I'm out.
Well, we'll see you later on. All good.
No, I appreciate that. So I had said, just to backtrack, so to say what I was going to say, is like when we started this, I literally just, I have, as I said, I have a ton of respect for both of you and the work that you do. We like each other, we're friends, and I just wanted to hang out with my friends and talk about the work that I love. And so, yeah, that was the premise of the whole podcast, was to just talk about things that are super important, that are interesting, that and with people I really want to do it with. And so we've for 9 episodes now, we've done that.
Yeah, I think I remember the one shared goal being, well, if we get to episode 10, then let's talk. Let's decide what happens next. The fun part is episode 10 is already scheduled, our guests for that episode scheduled, and we've scheduled out to almost episode 15, 16, I lost count, and we're lining up special guests for some of those. And so I feel like, and we'll touch on this towards the end, kind of how we make decisions as a group. I feel like we just kind of said, cool, 10 was fun. We're not even going to really do that deep dive on there was no no-go, at least from my perspective.
Well, it was a little bit of an audacious idea in the first place, I will tell you. I think when you guys both said this to me, that we should think about doing this, I thought you were kidding for a long time. And, Corey and I texted for probably 3 months with these weird nostalgic things about Gen X youth. And I'm like, I am not going to be able to talk about this stuff on a podcast. I hope we're going to talk about something that I have some better and deeper connection to, other than the nostalgic cartoons that I watched when I was 7. But it is what it has also brought, I think, is like a newfound joy in the work, and a newfound opportunity for us to be able to just kind of dissect some of what we think a lot about, perhaps quietly and by ourselves, out loud, with people who we appreciate and people who have brains that are fun to explore with. And what has been so interesting to me has been the fact that that has resonated with people, that people are reaching out to the three of us independently all together and saying, this is great. This is so much fun. And we're really enjoying the opportunity to listen to the three of you talk about these things. And that gives me kind of some excitement to keep this going. But I think it might be fun also to talk a little bit about who those people might be in terms of some of the stats that Corey has been pulling together. So I'm going to toss it over to you, Corey, to kind of walk us through some of that.
Okay, well, hold on. You mean it's
Oh.
not just the people that we know?
No, well,
It's not just it's not just friends and family?
Usually the people that know me don't want to hear me talk any more than I already do. So
but you hit a big milestone today. And so for all of our listeners,
God, here we go. Yeah.
Phil hit 5,000 followers today on LinkedIn and is very proud of that. He has worked very hard to curate his persona, his content, and to be really a thoughtful, authentic leading voice in the profession through the work he does on LinkedIn. And so that is way more probably than Mike and I combined, actually.
Probably 2 times more than us combined.
Well, first of all, I don't know that I'm a leading voice in anything, but I do appreciate your comment. And I think what I have tried to do and what I think we do very well together is really that same thing, which is to bring a little bit of reality to the profession, to the city management world, to try to demystify a little bit of it. We talk about this a lot. You know, none of us are the smartest people in the room. We surround ourselves with bright minds, and what we have been able to do is to curate great conversations and to curate kind of an inquisitiveness about how to do what we do better. And I do try to tell stories along those lines, and I think that has resonated with people for one reason or another. But it's certainly not about me. I think the most important thing is to be able to tell good stories about this work and how important this work is, both to me and to all of us, right? In this small world of a profession, where everybody is connected so closely. What did we say? It's 2 degrees of separation, right? It's not a joke. It really is that tight.
It is a small world.
Yeah.
So we each have very different skill sets, leadership styles. And so before we hit record tonight, Phil was making fun of me for how long the run of show is, because I actually put in a ton of screenshots as I started to collect data over the past couple weeks, because all the data on the back end of the platforms we're using changes in real time.
Yeah, I'm super curious because I don't do any show prep. What does the data say?
All right. So we do kind of 2 paths. So one is YouTube, and I'll do that one second. And the other one is Spotify. And so if you've been along with us on the journey, it took us a minute or 2 to get to Apple. And that's because I have my own biases, and we can make fun of me about that later, which is probably going to come up here in a hot minute when I get to the stats. So the Spotify data comes through, and it includes some Amazon and Apple data on the back end. And half of our listeners are between the ages of 35 and 44. And that actually went down this week because something else happened. We now have more than 10% in the 28 to 34. And somehow magically we have 5% under the age of 18. So I'm not sure whose kids think we're interesting, but thank you. That's fantastic.
Aspiring city managers. Look at that. See, this is how you promote the profession.
People who care about their communities, which is
That's right.
awesome. But to your guys' credit, 71% of listeners that come through the Spotify kind of network are iPhone listeners. And so you can make fun of me for not being an Apple person, because I'm clearly not in the majority, but our listeners are.
We would never.
No, I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it pass because right, as any good project manager does, they let the data drive the decision making. And so just because Apple is the best product out there, lots of people use it,
Yeah.
and the numbers like show that to be true. So good for us.
Yeah, they sure do, because 53% of the listeners come out of Apple Podcasts. So thank you, Phil, for solving that problem for me, because that was my deal or no deal. Like, you have to do it if you want it done. And you were
Corey,
gracious
it's
about
team
doing
sport. It's a team
it. It is.
sport. We're all here for each other.
But this is the one, and I have no reason to be surprised by this, but 64% of our listeners are female. And I just think that is awesome. Like, at first I was surprised, and then I got really, really proud that whatever we're doing is hitting this meaningful spot for people who are females and younger than us. And having come up through the ranks, it's not always an easy path. And so I am super grateful that some version of magic that we're doing is keeping that listener base with us. And that is just amazing.
So Corey, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did you think it would be different?
I think because the profession is so gender imbalanced. Now, when you get into department heads, obviously things equal out a lot more. But, there's been a lot of research over the last many, many decades, and women rarely hold the top seat. Just statistically is what it
No,
is.
I appreciate that. And so I am also grateful for it as well. I mean, I think it's where we found a niche that was sort of different from what you see in other podcasts. That's right. Full of old white guys that look like me.
Especially the old part. So, sorry.
No, I am proud to be the old guy of the group, and I am also be proud to be sporting a new Timberwolves hat because the
very
season will be
nice.
starting in October. So let's go.
You look good, man.
Thanks.
Fall is upon us.
Sure is.
So switching over to YouTube though, and I dropped in a short this weekend, and that like skewed some stuff because apparently people really appreciate Victor in Lions Get Up. But and this data probably means nothing in the land of content generation of YouTubers. But for 3 Gen Xers who are like, oh, this seems kind of fun, I thought it was fascinating. So we have almost 2,000 views, but we have 149 hours of watch time. So people have given us almost 150 hours of their time. And that was just such a cool thing to think about. Time is finite, right? You don't get more of it. And that people have spent time with us. I feel really, really grateful. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. 75% of the watch behavior is by new viewers. And so only 20% is from subscribers. Until Victor came on the podcast with us, I don't even think we asked people to like subscribe, do all the things that in every YouTube video I've ever watched the hosts do.
Okay, so I got to say a couple of things. So the like and subscribe thing, I didn't understand until I listened to it. I listened to a different podcast, and they were talking about the real value in liking and subscribing is to actually help us get better at what works. So now that we know who the audience is, we can actually deliver better content to that audience because you're right. Your time is finite. You can listen to any number of the things. You can watch Simpson reruns. You can do whatever you want. But if we create interesting content, we'll be able to if we know who our subscribers are, who our audience is, we can get better at tailoring what we're talking about to them. And that's actually ultimately what we need to do because talking into the universe is sort of just an idea, but talking to a specific group of people who care about the things that we're talking about will make us actually better. So when people do like something or when they do subscribe to something, it actually helps us be better at the work. And so that's one of those things that I would encourage. So Victor had a couple of lines, right? Hit like and subscribe and go Lions.
And I think the one thing, and I'll touch on the LinkedIn stuff, and then we'll kind of kick it into if you guys were looking at this through a city manager lens, and this was your communications team talking to you, what do you make sense of at this point? So we're all on LinkedIn. We talked about Phil being the most profound of us. But we started, one of the things we did is we started a brand page, a company page on LinkedIn, because that was the one thing I was comfortable with, the one thing we all knew that we could do and would be okay. So we're up to 186 followers. That's amazing. We have 14,000 impressions on our posts, which is pretty wild. And, Victor's Lions, the Tanya lead into her episode, all really great things. Some of Charlene's quotes have gotten us really great coverage. So our guests mean a lot to the future of the podcast for sure. But we're hitting a mark, but we really don't know what it measures against, because none of us went into this going, I want to be a content creator on YouTube. Like, that wasn't the goal. So if you were guys take it back into the work for our audience. So what questions do you have now, based on we have kind of our first round of data?
Oh, well, I think it's interesting as we think about it from the standpoint of like the social media platforms, and obviously we're kind of in two zones right now with LinkedIn and YouTube, and that's okay, right? It's starting and figuring it out, and we can talk about the other platforms and whether or not that builds what we're trying to do, which is listenership and curating better discussions that people want to consume and how to do that. LinkedIn is an interesting platform. I will tell you, as much as I use it, I have a really hard time understanding how the algorithm works. It's not clear. It changes. It likes links and then it doesn't like links. So I've started posting and not including the link, for instance, to our YouTube page, and waiting an hour and posting it in the comments section, because that supposedly helps out the algorithm boost the post a little bit more. Last year I had 500,000 impressions on my posts on LinkedIn. I don't know if that's good from the standpoint of what I'm trying to do. And I think that's to some degree what we're learning and trying to figure out as we look at these numbers. They all sound interesting, but are they good? And I think that's part of what we are going to have to discern over time. In my own organization, we started out about 3 years ago using TikTok for some of the video content that we were creating. I started a video program called Office Hours. It was a little too long for TikTok. We weren't getting the kind of impressions that we were hoping for. So we actually stopped because it wasn't making sense to us as where we were trying to deliver the content. Yeah, it's great to get 100,000 views, but if I can't get 300 more than 300 in my own community, I don't know if it matters, right? When we're talking about trying to deliver that kind of messaging. So for us, I think it's a little bit of understanding how we want the information to land and where we want it. I think Mike's point is exactly right. The better engagement we get and the more likes and follows and comments that we receive, that helps us to understand what's resonating with people, or more importantly, what's not. And as we look at the 8 episodes that have been dropped, it's interesting to kind of see the line is not a straight up and down. We bump up, drop down, bump up, drop down. It's not a perfect ascension, right? So I think that's going to be part of what we figure out.
So you said something interesting, Phil, that it's actually works out in my professional life. So I have always worked in predominantly racially diverse communities. It's just I worked in the second most racially diverse community, one of my first jobs, and I'm in a racially diverse community now. And we make a distinction between outreach and engagement, and it goes like, right. So outreach is those things that you do to build trust, to be known in the community. And so, and an engagement is that activity, right? That's where people are joining a board and commission. That's where they're volunteering on a task force. That's where they're maybe running for city council. The engagement is differently. And so I often think about like a little bit about what we're doing is in this stage sort of outreach. We're just going out into like different parts of the world and saying, okay, this is us. This is what we're trying to do. Right. We think that we're trusted voices in the profession, but we're starting to see who actually views us as a trusted voice. And so then we kind of build that and figure out who that is. Then we can do engagement in there. And I think that's where you will sort of deepen and strengthen. And I think a lot of times in local government, right, lots of us have engagement departments, but what we're missing, I think, is that outreach first to be a well-established, trusted voice that then I can engage with and do actually meaningful things with. So I hadn't thought about it until you just talked about engagement. So I appreciate you triggering my thoughts and also making me a little bit think differently about what our next phase is.
So for a guy who does not read run of the show, like that was the most perfect segue. So
Really?
whatever gift the universe
Okay.
just sent down.
I think he reads more than he lets
No,
on.
no,
I'm
I
just
can
going to say.
promise you, I
Yeah.
can promise you I don't read it.
So the next section is about stakeholder perspectives, values, and how we get those opinions, right? So who are our stakeholders? Now we talked about the data and what we're learning. But as we look at being kind of stewards of the profession and the greater industry, we've all gotten feedback from friends, professional colleagues, random messages through LinkedIn, whatever it is. And so let's talk about how the feedback comes in, what it's been, and then how you weight it. Because even if you're running a pilot program in, I don't care if it's private sector or nonprofit or the public sector, not all voices are the same. Not all data points have the same value.
So part of when I think about the goals that I had stepping into this, one of them is to help people to understand what it is that our profession does, right? What is it that city managers actually do? And the byproduct of that is hopefully to get either people to stay engaged in this very important work or to bring new people in. You know, as far back as I can remember in my professional life, and now it's touching on a quarter of a century, we have talked about the need to promote the profession. ICMA years ago was Life Well Run, right? We all can remember, I remember the binder in my office with the VHS tapes that we could run on our cable, public access channels talking about the value of professional local government management. And so we've been talking about this for a long time as a profession, as a thing that we need to do. And what has been interesting to me is I have actually heard from a couple of different groups fairly consistently. One group is the thank you for helping me to feel proud about what we do. Again, because it's a really hard time and it's really I've been questioning whether I actually want to do this work. And I'm not saying that you guys have convinced me to never look outside, but to know that there are people who kind of think the way that I do is really helpful. That's come from people who I've never met before, people who I am connected with on LinkedIn or have heard of through other channels, but people who are actually like, yeah, I needed somebody to kind of tell me it was good and this is something that I should keep doing. And I've also heard from kind of aspiring professionals, people who are like, I'm not sure I actually want to be a manager. I like being in government, but it's really hard for me to picture myself in that chair because I see what my manager goes through, or I see what managers, kind of in adjacent communities go through, and it's really scary. And I'm not sure that I want to do it, but I want to keep thinking about it. And I think that's, for me, when we talk about those core audiences, it's how do we say to people, look, it isn't easy work. It's really hard. Some days are worse than others. Most days are not, oh my God, I can't believe we got that done. It's like, oh, thank God we got that line of the plan done, right? And there's now 78 pages more that we have to do. But it's progress, right? How do we continue to help people be enthusiastic promoters of the work that they do? And does that also give us the opportunity to help other people that support those people, either elected officials, appointed officials, just regular citizens, say, this is something that is good. this is something maybe that I didn't understand. How do we, that's the audience I want to find our path toward too, because I think those people are the ones that we have the opportunity to help them better grasp this work and why it's so important. So it's been an interesting ride for me in terms of dialoguing with folks.
Phil, that was great. I appreciate that. So, Corey, I saw the thought bubbles occur in your head as you were on the screen. How do you react to that?
So, the thought that was rolling through my head as Phil was talking through kind of his experiences were more that in a world that's filled with noise and at the local government level dissension, right? Like you see us in the podcast the same that you would see us at a conference, the same that you would see us in Target. Like this is what you get. And that to me matters. I think that's super important. But also that we're able to talk about the hard things in a way that doesn't just constantly cut other people down. You are never going to hear in this podcast us speak negatively about a person, ever, because that's just not who we are individually or collectively. And I think we can have hard conversations about hard topics. We can talk about things without making it personal, without putting people or organizations down, without blame. And that matters to me. And so when I kind of hear that mirrored back to me, that's the first time I've probably ever articulated that. But I hear that in the comments from kind of people in my own network, or my friends are like, "Oh, that was the funniest one yet," or "Wow, I learned these things." Those little comments about somehow we either taught somebody something or somebody learned something new, or Phil, to your point, we just made life feel a little better. Like that to me is what success looks like.
Yeah, that is terrific, and I have had some of the feedback. So I have a friend in Illinois, and so Phil, yes, I have friends in Illinois. That right,
God,
it's amazing.
I'm gonna write that down.
And this is the text I got. Hey, I just wanted to check in and let you know that I love what you are doing, what you all are doing with the pod. Like, so it didn't say podcast, right? What you are all doing at the pod. And I was like, what a nice thing to come out and say. Because
Mhm.
we actually don't know if this is actually useful or helpful or anything. Yeah. I mean, yes, people are listening, but we don't know if it's any good. And so, Corey, to your point, I think I have heard it from a handful of people that they do appreciate that we are positive, because you can go out there and find people who trash local government and ICMA in general pretty regularly and pretty consistently. And at the end of the day, there's nothing that's sort of built that's different than that. So I want to go back to one of your early comments, which I thought was really helpful, which is like, you can make stuff, but how do you decide what to make that's going to be lasting and impactful? I used to be the facilities director for Hennepin County. It's the largest county in Minnesota, and it had of all things, 41 libraries. And yeah, believe it or not, 41. And so we made a pledge that we were going to do a construction project in a library every 10 years, whether it needed it or not, because communities change,
Yeah.
things decline and deteriorate. And there was so much power in that commitment to place, because we know that, right? I mean, up the street in my neighborhood, there's a library that's got to be 70-ish years old. And I know that library is going to be there for another 70 years. And I mean that because that's the commitment that is made to place. And so when you know something is going to be lasting, you treat it differently. You treat it with more reverence. And so one of the questions I'm going to have for maybe both of you is, what are those things in your communities or in your organizations that get treated with reverence, that don't get touched in a negative way, but are held up in a high regard and high esteem? Because I do think in a lot of ways, cities are like that, because they don't change. The cities don't go away. They don't get erased from the map. So what in your communities sort of stand out as those things that are sort of untouchable or sacred?
Well, I mean, the obvious one's the Mississippi River because she's not going anywhere.
Nope.
And I would say what's evolved And I think this is true for the whole stretch, right? I mean, Mike, I remember times I would yell at you for sending snow downstream at me because it was not going to be fun. I was not going to have a good spring,
Sorry about that.
but you weren't, and we moved on.
No, we love the snow.
Um, but I think learning to live with the river, right? And we talked about that on one of the earliest episodes. Is you will never beat Mother Nature. She is always more powerful and more destructive than anything you can engineer. And so I think for the Quad Cities in particular, learning to live with the river and take advantage of it, right? I think it's one of those things that when it's in your own backyard, you forget to value it. And when people come from far and wide, I remember when we launched or announced that Viking was going to start touring the Mississippi. And the Quad Cities is a stop, which of course along the Mississippi is a no-brainer. And you watch all these tourists, both domestic and from abroad, just fall in love. And you're like, if only the community felt that way about this place. And so I think that has been a really interesting thing to reflect on is how this amazing asset, which can be destructive every once in a while, often gets lost in how important it really is.
Wow, I don't know that I could love that statement more in terms of like being reminded of the spaces and of the things that make our communities what they are. This isn't my community, but I was in downtown Chicago with my family a couple weeks ago, and it had been a bit since we had spent any appreciable time. Like to go to the museums and bounce around, bounce back home, but we were on the Riverwalk for 3.5, 4 hours. We took the architectural boat cruise, the 90-minute one, because my kids wanted to do it. They wanted to see. And I'm sitting there on this boat or on the Riverwalk observing what's happening around me. And I'm saying, I live 20 miles away and I never come down to appreciate this. And I literally was walking with a smile on my face the whole time saying, this is unbelievably beautiful. This is amazing. This is something that few places in the world have. And we have it right here. And how do we cherish that? And how do we make it so that it doesn't go away? In my own community, I think about, what you just said, Corey, when you think about the natural beauty. I've got bluffs that overlook Lake Michigan. When you're in downtown Chicago, you walk right into Lake Michigan. In Glencoe, we're 60 feet up. And so I can go to that overlook, which here's a Glencoe trivia point for all of you who do trivia on Friday nights or whatever. When Cameron is having his catatonic moment in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, that is the Park Avenue overlook that is 35-second walk from my office that overlooks Lake Michigan. And there are times when I walk down there and I'm like, I am on the Caribbean. The water is so crystal blue. The space is so unbelievably beautiful. And I don't give myself the time to fall in love with it every day. And how do we help our communities do that? On the other side of it, programmatically, we also have those things, right? I have a public safety department. It was created in 1954. State law changed about 20 years ago. We're grandfathered in. You can't create these departments anymore. Everybody is cross-trained as a police officer, firefighter, and either an EMT or an EMTP, paramedic. It's really hard to keep doing this. The amount of training, the amount of learning that these individuals have to do on a regular basis is immense. And yet, we will never change it. It is so appreciated by the community. And our officers are so dedicated to the work and of carrying the burdens of those three very different, very important skill sets along with them throughout their careers. It's amazing. And I have to sometimes remind myself that was an innovation that a predecessor of mine had an idea about, made happen, And now I have a responsibility to cultivate it so that it stays around. It doesn't mean that it doesn't change. It doesn't mean that we don't tweak it. It doesn't mean that it's perfect, but it means it's important. And so you cultivate it. And how do you keep it going so that it's something that 70 years from now, somebody says that was the best idea that ever happened?
Okay, so I gotta say, I just love when you guys talk about where you live because it's so magic. Like you're like jumping through the screen. There's like such an excitement. So this was a totally unplanned question because I again I don't do any preparation, but it wound up being a magical moment. So appreciate you both for sharing it, and I think for the audience, for the listeners, that like it's a hopefully a moment to pause and reflect about what those things in their communities really stand out and mean for them.
S- That's awesome. I think, Phil, one of the interesting things about your story is going back into my economic development roots, and this will tell you a little bit about my own neuroses. When I go to buy a house, Target has to be within 7 miles. And so that's because way back when I learned site selection strategies, that is
Um,
not even a
a great
Minnesota
Minnesota.
benefit. It's just
Yeah.
a happy accident. So when I was in Arizona and we were doing all the site selection work, Target will locate at the time, this is a long time ago now, 7 miles from itself, right? So I knew, and of my own kind of consumer demographics, and I know we have that on our future episodes list, that I wanted to be in that bubble, because if Target was in that bubble, that met my kind of consumer preference for neighborhoods and amenities and all that kind of stuff. Most people live their daily life in a 1 mile circle. And I think if you reflect on, now granted, it can be a mile from your house and a mile from work, and you might stop along the convenient trail between the two places, but most of your life is in a 1 mile bubble, maybe 3 nowadays because retail's changed a little bit. But think about that when it comes to place, and how I think that's how we lose sight of the more grandiose and more important parts of the what makes communities so special, is because we get so ingrained in our little bubbles.
Well, so I got to say, as for the third Target reference made on the show, and it's a proud Minnesota company. I just appreciate the branding and the opportunity to promote a wonderful Fortune 500 company in the neighborhood. So kudos to you guys for just keep saying Target, shop at Target. It's amazing. Like and subscribe to us, and then to Target.
And don't forget where to buy your 3M merchandise, right? I mean, isn't that the important part of it?
Listen, I appreciate you guys. This is great for the local economy. So, but that's not the point of this conversation. So the point of this, let's go bring it back to the podcast, which is sort of like, right? Podcasts, like they have a beginning, yes, and we had a fun, successful beginning, and sort of in our own minds. But is it something that we want to sustain and continue to grow and evolve? And I sort of reference that, right? Cities don't have end date, right? The maps don't change. The cities don't go out of business and stop existing. Um,
If they do, it's for very bad reasons.
and I will
Yes.
say, yes, that's true. And I think in some ways, it's a disservice to those residents in those communities that they don't go out of business. We have seen cities in decline for decades, if not generations. And so as a manager, what is your responsibility, or what is our responsibility really, in terms of making sure that our communities remain vital and relevant? And then the second question is, what is our responsibility to make sure our podcast remains vital and sustaining? So feel free to answer either one. I'm open to whatever, because again, I don't do any prep.
So I think one of the interesting things, and I know we talked about this offline, is being the one who takes the hatchet out to stop things. Never popular. I've never made one of those decisions, and gotta thank you. But they're important. And so, like in our community, before I left the city, we have a 70s era, used to be 5 acre indoor mall. And it
I
has
shopped
been
there a
in,
lot in college. A lot.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and
Yeah.
I mean, it was owned by a big national REIT, which is divested of other assets in the region. And like, if you know anything about kind of commercial real estate, and especially on the retail side, It was already on the runway it's on long before COVID, and COVID and Amazon just smushed it. Um, and so I think having those hard conversations about, like, Phil, to your point, you shop that mall. You've probably been in that mall way more times than I have been, like, easily, because it's like twice for me. Because I'm just not a mall shopper. That's
Right.
just not who I am. And but to have a conversation around what is a very stable neighborhood around it and say, yeah, I mean, realistically, a bunch of it's going to have to get torn down. And that I've been blessed to work on a project like that in Colorado where we got to do that, and what's built now is amazing. But that change management part, to say you're going to have to give something up, change is going to happen. You shouldn't willfully accept decline to the point of no return. Like, you should be able to decline before you have absolutely failed. And I think that is metaphorical across, I don't care if it's neighborhoods or what the service area is, park maintenance, whatever it is. If it is in decline, you have to have the hard conversation and the hard brainstorming sessions of what does different look like and how do we manage our way through it? Because if you don't do it before it's too late, failure is the outcome, and no one should want to accept failure.
I think it's our job to see the future as best as we can and to be the person who says it is time to have that conversation before we need to. I think, to your point, exactly, the struggle with traditional retail has been being too comfortable that it's just going to be fine, right? And it's going to succeed. It'll get through this. It'll be fine. Or housing is fine. We don't need to talk about it too much. We don't want to think too hard about making those changes because it will be fine. It'll all work out. And I think the hard part for us is you don't make a lot of friends by being the person who tells bad news to groups of people who don't want to hear it. And I don't care if you're talking about your residents. I don't care if you're talking about your employees. I don't care if you're talking about your business community. It is never popular to be the person who brings the cold bucket of water to the party. And I think the hard part is seeking to maintain that level of awareness and honesty. To Mike's point before, it is about that engagement so that people understand that where you are coming from is not from an area of criticism. It's not from an area of judgment. It's from an area of, look, everybody, we have to trust each other and we have to start seeing these things and we have to start working toward fixing them before the problem actually exists, which is super difficult. And I will tell you, as it relates to my own organization, we're sitting through internal budget discussions right now. And I just had a very difficult conversation with one of our departments where they were proposing, we're going to do this. We think that if we invest in this software, it's going to make this program so much better. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. I understand where you're coming from, but let's talk a little bit about it. Let's talk, how many people touch this process? How many people are involved in executing upon this program? And what benefit do we derive from that? Well, we used to get this, but we don't use that anymore. And we still have this data set, but we're not really sure why. And this used to be really important, but it's not so important anymore. I said, okay, all right, well, so how much revenue do we generate off of this program? Oh, it's we at least break even. So why are we doing it? And sometimes it's such a difficult question to ask, where somebody is like, well, but of course how could we not do it? Well, because you're not actually benefiting anybody by doing it. And maybe now you have time freed up to do the things that you're complaining you don't have time to do because You don't have to do this thing over here that nobody cares about anymore. That's what we're talking about, right? Those are those hard conversations. And maybe that's a conversation around this podcast that we get to at some point, but I don't think we're there yet.
So Phil, I made this joke a couple of podcast episodes ago, so you're going to have to go back, like, subscribe, and watch old versions. But you made my heart grow 3 sizes in that conversation, because I love that conversation in an organization or on a conference room table when you ask, well, wait a minute, well, what are you actually trying to do, and what problem are you trying to solve? And it's the probing, it's the probing, it's the probing. And so one of the things that I have talked about in my own organization is, and right, we talk about, like, I do this, right? We are really, really good at turning the crank and making widgets. We never stop and think, "Well, what if I just pulled a lever and I got more widgets?" We never stop to think about what we're doing. And so part of the fun about, like, sort of this exercise is the pausing and the stopping and looking at the data and looking at process and looking at systems and saying, is there a better way to do all of these things that doesn't require doing it exactly the same way? And it's my favorite conversation. And Corey, you said something, nobody likes the hatchet person. So one of my favorite stories is we had to let someone go be successful somewhere else. And they actually thanked us for firing them. And so there is actually, some people know they're in the wrong job. They know they're in the wrong environment, and they actually appreciate when someone helps them maybe make the decision for them. So I just wanted to say, I sometimes people do like when somebody is the hatchet person, because it actually frees them up from something that they've held on to for far too long.
So I want to connect something both of you said. This is a living lab episode, and we're just going to roll with it. We talked about our demography earlier. Maybe not all people in the top chair. I think statistically that's a fair assumption. If you have younger employees and people that are a couple layers down, because government is still very hierarchical, just is, how do you allow those voices who are usually more creative, more interested in asking why, more disruptive, just because they haven't been, it's like a stone, they haven't been ground down around the edges yet? How do they get to engage without being told, oh, you just don't know yet? How do you welcome those voices in when maybe the structure of your organization doesn't give them permission?
Woof. That's a hard question.
This
It's
feels like
hard.
an interview question. So Phil, as the
Yeah.
village manager in Glencoe, how would you answer that question?
So there's a couple of problems that we have to be aware of and we have to work toward. One is we have to make sure that the organization doesn't look at that as some sort of affront. So mid-level managers, department directors, supervisors, they need to feel safe that if somebody who works for them is making a suggestion or voicing an idea, that isn't going to reflect poorly on the supervisor, right? And I think that as humans, we struggle sometimes, especially in a hierarchical environment, we struggle sometimes to believe that. Um, I I have always kind of preached this. Tell me what you're thinking. I want to know. And this, I've always experienced this frustration of nobody actually wanting to say it to me. And I had a department head say to me the other day, and this was a really honest moment for them, and somewhat difficult for me to hear, which was, I know you want to hear the ideas, but sometimes I'm afraid to tell you because I don't think you'll think it's a good idea. Because if it was a good idea, I think you would have come up with it already. And I'm like, how am I conveying myself to you if you think I think I'm the smartest person in the room? Because I have said it on this podcast probably tonight. I know I've said it other times. I'm not. But something about what I do sometimes makes my team feel like they can't say what they're thinking or can't throw a unique idea out on the table. So, why do I tell that very complicated story? It's that we have a responsibility to hear that when we are told that maybe we're not cultivating the environment that we want to cultivate all the time. And that environment of people openly sharing their ideas and throwing them out on the table. And, I don't know if it came up on the screen before, but I was patting my head when Corey was saying, "Oh, isn't that precious that you came up with such a cute idea? You have no idea what you're talking about, right?" And we just passively pat them on the head and say, "Oh, well, they'll figure it out someday." Like, we have to really work to not have that reaction when new ideas get thrown out on the table. Not all of them are good. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be said, right? Like, within reason. But that was really hard for me to hear because um, it isn't the way I want to be perceived. And so being able to understand that maybe I have to be a little more like Mike and the thoughtful and more inquisitive person who throws a question out on the table and seeks to kind of pull from the person what it is they're trying to get at. What are they trying to solve? What is the problem that's out on the table? And how are they thinking about it, right? How do we get there so that we're all kind of talking together about the same thing, which is a way to solve a problem, not shutting it down as kind of oh, they'll figure it out someday. How difficult it is to be whatever it is that we see ourselves.
Well, I just had a moment of shudder because we don't need two of me in the universe. But
More
for
people like you. There's
no,
never
that's
no one
that's
could ever replicate Mike
so
Sable.
that's absolutely not true, but I appreciate you saying that. But I will say, like, in a very practical way in my own organization. So, and I'll say this in a couple of ways. So for all of the younger female listeners of the show, you need to be city manager
Yes.
because it is transformational. And there's a moment in the organization where people start to say things that you're thinking because they're watching you, they're paying attention. And so there's absolute power. And I actually learned that one of my colleagues and friends in Minnesota, she's just an exceptional leader. And she was a manager and then she went back to an assistant in a larger community. And she actually said, I miss being in charge because they don't think like me and they don't talk like me because there is an actual, like, right, you're building culture. And when you're in, quote unquote, the big chair, it is different. Like, people do listen to you differently. So I say that just to say, like, so one of the things that I have done is we have a group, we call it, right, it's the senior management team. It's all the managers and high level supervisors in the organization. And we meet with some frequency. And one of the things that I like to do is to take away tables and chairs. And so we sit in a big circle, 8 inches knee to knee. So it is intimate. You're like, you are close. You're like, you can touch the person next to you on either side. And I made a pledge to my department heads. I said, I'm going to ask a bunch of questions and I don't want you to respond. I want you to sit in the uncomfortable silence that's going to happen because we know it's going to happen because people will get a question and they're like, well, what's my boss going to say?
Yeah.
Well, what's the public works director thinking? What's the community development director thinking? And so kudos to my leadership team for not responding. And then all of a sudden, right, the assistant fire chief sort of went first, and then somebody else went, and then somebody else went. And so then it took, like I will say it, right, it probably took a good solid 8 minutes for people to feel comfortable, but expressly saying, I actually care what you think. What do you have to say? And then it cultivated. So by the time we've done this now, half a dozen times or so, like, people jump in, people contribute. And then someone says, I agree with part of that, but I also think this. And then it's just like this, like, secret sauce, a little bit of, like, and not to bring it back to the podcast, but we didn't actually have any of this planned, but the dialogue and sort of the bouncing and the feedback back and forth. I mean, Corey put a good structure together to get us talking, but this is what organizations do. I build on something or I modify something. And so, because our whole purpose is we want this conversation to further the profession, to further the listeners, to further our own work in this work, and how we actually do the podcast. And so for me, this is what a good leadership team in a city ought to do is start a conversation, grow, adapt, build. And so, Corey, one of the things that you and I talked about earlier this week is like a lot of organizations refuse to adapt and modify to the real world. And I don't know if this is too early to ask this question, but like, what happens to entities that don't adapt to or sort of see a trend and then latch onto it? Can you share a little bit about kind of what you're thinking?
So, and you and I have had this conversation in varying forms for years now. And to your point, governments don't come and go. And I promise you, we are going to have an episode on consumer behavior and government and how governments need to start treating their residents as consumers. Because if you don't, it well, it won't be pretty always. Um, but I think for organizations more holistically, and we see it with talent, if you are not thriving and innovating, the talent that wants to thrive and grow and innovate will find the organization that will. And that's the most immediate consequence, I think, to any organization. But, you know, as we've grown in this podcast, this is not rocket science for three people who have zero training in this. Yet we're doing it and we're having fun doing it, and we're learning what it means. And this is one example of probably 100 different examples of how content and communication are going to evolve. And they're going to evolve really fast. And how networks get built and how people engage. Like, we're at the precipice of probably one of the most transformative eras, definitely of our lifetime, in what happens next. And so if you're going to sit on the sidelines and be like, nope, I'm going to say no to everybody, or you're going to not try the thing. And I know at some point we're going to get into what scaling up looks like and some of my own discomforts with that. But if you're going to lean into the status quo, somebody who is more nimble and more creative is going to wipe you out. And it's not going to be malicious. And I don't say that as a scare tactic. I say it in the way that if I can think of the really crazy things I think of all day long as I'm writing a book and thinking about what an ecosystem around a book looks like, and it's got like 12 different pieces, and I can think of that, there are thousands of people having that same thought. And so if you're not leaning into different, creative, smarter, more vulnerable, you will get left behind. And we are just at, we've talked many times about how we love Generations book and Neil Howe. We're at that point in history right now.
One of the bits of advice that I got when I started in the big chair for the first time was, and it wasn't a threatening statement, but it felt a little threatening at the time. It was never get comfortable. And I think especially the longer we're in a job or the longer that we are in a space, you understand a lot, right? You see a lot, but you also sometimes are immune from understanding how things are changing. And whether that's the community, the people who are moving into the community, the expectations of those that are moving out, and how you adapt and augment what you do to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the community that is changing around you, or it's your organization, right? And that the people who started at one point and then end up retiring, they have odd legacies. Sometimes they're really great, and sometimes it's like the program that I was just talking about a few minutes ago. It's like nobody knows why. Nobody has any idea why we're doing that thing, but somebody did it 25 years ago, so we better keep doing it. And we have to be, to your point, Corey, aware of what it is that is happening around us, and in a space of vulnerability to say, maybe I don't understand, and how am I going to? Who am I going to engage? How do I put myself out there in a way that's perhaps very uncomfortable, but now at least I have a better sense of how to drive my organization to help the community to succeed or to change or to go through that difficult time, but to get to a better place. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to be willing to be uncomfortable, even though it's perhaps the least comfortable space for us to occupy.
So let me pick on, it's not directly related to city management, but it is absolutely in the ballpark. So education. And coming out of COVID, one of the things that I was really impressed by, so Arizona State's one of my alma maters, and they have built entire academic academies that go from in-person all the way to virtual, fully virtual. And so I looked into it at one point as an alternative, like if we needed to make a change, what did that look like? And my son could attend Arizona State at the K-12 level from Iowa. And to ASU's credit, like in high school, they start getting college level credits. And that's more common now than it was, but this is completely remote, right? And Dr. Crow, who's been at ASU for a long time now, is probably one of the most profound higher ed innovators I've ever seen. And how he's transformed a university has been amazing, even for the Phoenix Metro. But think about how, and my neighbor and I talk about this all the time, how college is going to be fundamentally different by the time our kids get there, which is not that far away anymore, because it is a system that really hasn't evolved. And when I worked on a journal article, an academic journal article with my chair, I'm like, this is the most archaic, bureaucratic, like, I never want to be a higher ed. I never want to be a college teacher after doing, like, this publish or perish thing is insane. And so we had that whole conversation about, yeah, that's going to die too, right? Because these
Right.
systems are just purposefulness, if that's a word. I don't know.
I love the word. B, as somebody who has just scheduled college visits for my oldest. No, it's awful. It's terrifying. And so I'm on this journey. If only we had a future guest that could talk about sustainable innovations.
Like only.
We should actually we should try to talk about that at some point in the future. Shameless plug. This is why you should like and subscribe to the podcast, because we are going to talk about that in the future. It's going to be great. And so stay tuned for I'm sure it'll be some sort of Instagram short that will preview our amazing upcoming guests, because it's coming. Corey's making it look good. She gave me eyes on the screen. If you guys didn't see that, she is very nervous. She is not only a friend and a colleague, but also is the production intern. So it's an amazing job. So Corey, I'm so grateful for that you're here.
So again, your segues are just on fire.
I was just going to say that's the perfect segue.
Is this really? Did we talk about this?
We're gonna.
My next note is scaling up.
Yep.
Well, let's do that.
And you said Instagram, which we don't have.
Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling.
Which is a whole separate conversation, which we're about to get into.
Can I just jump in? So I will freely admit I don't do social media, right? I don't have Facebook. I don't have X. I do have an Instagram account that I actually don't know how to use.
But you do have teenagers, so
you figured it out today.
You have
So
reverse mentors.
My daughter tried to teach me how to even look at stuff, and I got overwhelmed, so I stopped. But I opened it today because I was looking at some things that were happening in Minneapolis recently, and I wanted to go look at them. And it saw a friend request from Phil Corrali, and I was like, oh, I know him, and I hit yes. Right? That seems like a logical thing to do. And immediately I got a text message with like laughter and mock and ridicule.
Glee. It was with glee.
I literally spit out the Diet Coke that I was drinking when it popped up on my phone because I was so surprised that Mike figured out how to do that. It was great. I was so thrilled. So thrilled.
Now, in fairness, the algorithm somehow connected us, and I just hit a button, but it felt like an important thing to do. It felt like growth, personal growth for me.
It's because we're in a group text, and so he thinks the bots think you know him because you actually know
That's
him.
right. That's right.
Okay, so
Because
I actually don't know how it works, but
everything's
so
talking.
let's go back. Scale.
It's all related. So scaling up, when we started, we talked about let's get to 10 and then we'll check in. So we're doing that a little early, but very intentionally, because I think this has gone better than I expected as the lowly production intern of the trio. Um, but what does scaling up look like? And so, Mike, from the beginning, you're like, we need a website. And I'm like, okay, well, what does the website do? And then Phil's like, we need to be on Insta. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Am I creating memes? Am I creating shorts? What does it mean? And what are we trying to achieve by doing it? Because some things get more efficient. I get better at editing. The tools also get better. Technology is changing so fast. But what's the so what? Like doing it because we can is lovely. But if we aren't saying why, start with why. I don't want to do it just to do it. I want to do it because there's a purpose and a desired outcome. So go forth on that one.
I want to raise my hand to speak as the
Hey, we have
perennial.
reactions on here.
Oh, we do. You're right. As the perennial, like rose-colored glasses member of this trio, um, the
It's true.
one that is like super jazzed about everything city management. Woo, it's great. So I see this as, again, what has been surprising to me has been the engagement that we've gotten, the outreach that I've heard personally, and that I know the two of you have gotten as well. Um, and I see it as a chance to help people to this profession, right? We're kind of fun. Hopefully, we're kind of cool. Oh, you guys, not so much me. Um, and I see in my own children the things that resonate with them that we look at Instagram together, and the things that they learn about, and yeah, there's giggles and laughs and cute puppies and things like that, but there's also like geography, and there's also like, oh, that's how this is made, those kinds of reels that give them snippets of information that they actually are interested in finding more out about. And my daughter will see something about farming, and suddenly I see that she pulls a book from the school library about farming. So, how do we use these tools again to help to promote the profession? How do we become ambassadors for what this is, right? Yes, it's hard. Yes, as I said before, but it's also important, and maybe never more so than it is right now. And how do we use it as a bridge to somebody? And I'm not even just talking about kids, right? This is, how many non-traditional employees do we have in our organizations, or do we know of in our neighboring communities or in our state associations, where we're like, I'm so glad we stole you from whatever fill in the blank industry, and that you're in government now. How can we build those bridges to people to say, I never even realized that was something I could do, and I'm thrilled to throw myself into it? So that's my pitch on why we should use more platforms. Maybe not so much the TikTok yet, but we'll get there.
I got to tell you, I'm out of this conversation. I have actually no experience. I have no idea what you're describing, but I will say, um, it's an interesting concept, right? It's like the idea that you can use different platforms to reach different audiences, sort of like logically compels me to at least want to consider it, because I do think there's some value in it. And right, I don't think that obviously we're not cool or interesting in outside of a very specific audience, but for the specific audience that we have, I do think it is fairly powerful that like, right, there is a thing that can actually work. There is a thing that um closed circuit to us. There's no money in this. Like we do it just because we love the profession, and that is a little bit of the sort of element of service that's in all of us.
So I think there is magic in having a central hub, which traditionally has been a website. And while that might feel a little cliche historic with where technology is going, if you do any playing around in AI, and we've talked, you guys know I use Perplexity most, it pulls from websites. Those are now the sources. Like, so if you ever look at the citations, it'll be YouTube, it'll be websites, it'll be blogs, that kind of thing. And so, from a hub and spoke perspective, having a website as the central point makes all the sense in the world. What that means for you two scaling up is that you're probably going to have to write blogs, because that's part of content creation. Yes, we can shoot podcasts, we can create shorts, we can do all those things, but there is still a ton of power in the written word. And the written word from seasoned, credentialed professionals means a lot more now than probably ever. And so that creates part of it. This is something we're building together very organically. And maybe it grows into something bigger, or maybe one day we decide, oh, that was a fun run, we should go do other stuff now. And either of those is fine, and we will go on that journey. But I think we're at the point where LinkedIn posts and videos are great. But if we want to be true stewards of the profession in a meaningful way, especially knowing who our demographic is at this early stage, there's a lot of opportunity to lean in. And I think one of the other things the website or even social media can do is, I want to start getting questions from the people who are listening. I want you to give me the big, ugly question you're afraid to ask anybody. And I want you to let us dissect it, and we'll keep everyone's confidentiality super pristine. But I love solving problems. Like, that brings me nothing but joy. And if we can be your, like, think about the whole era, like Loveline and everything else that we grew up with. If we can be your trusted voice of, so it's a
Holy
terrible analogy, but
that
you get what I'm saying.
that was a part of my brain I haven't used in a very long time. Holy cow!
God, that was
Wow.
yes.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So foundational
Yeah.
to that whole era, right? And if we can do that for this profession, and maybe you don't work in government, maybe you're a resident, maybe you're a frustrated resident,
Right.
and you want to know better how to engage, great, hit us up.
Okay, so so genuinely, I had no idea that you were going to say any of those things.
Especially the
I don't know if
Loveline
that's
thing.
good or bad.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean that's it. So people, I mean this. People think it's a bit. It's not a bit. So the book behind me is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And so like, if people don't know, right, I will like it's a book. So one of my favorite thought leaders is a guy named Dan Pink. We've talked about Dan Pink on the show. I love Dan Pink. He says this is one of the 3 most important books ever written. And it's a book about writing. And so you're talking about like compelling us to write a blog. And so I was like, oh God, like so this was not planned. I mean this in all seriousness. But so I had to Google it because I couldn't describe it. I was trying to put it into words. So it is a guide to offer practical and philosophical advice for writers, emphasizing that the process should be tackled one small step at a time. It encourages writers to write messy, create first drafts, embrace imperfection, observe the world closely, and find inspiration in personal experiences. This is the greatest line. And she discusses the importance of finding one's authentic voice. Like I literally had to Google that, but it captured so many thoughts in such a short amount of time. So this was fortuitous. The way you phrased it was perfect. And when the summary talks about finding an authentic voice is the reason why we do this.
Mm-hmm.
So Phil knows this, people close to me in my life. Part of my recovery process was journaling. And so every day, morning and night, so when we are done filming, I will write. I handwrite in cursive every single day, twice a day. And
Cursive. Hold on.
it
Cursive.
cursive.
What
Very
is this?
intentionally.
What is this cursive you talk of?
Look at that.
Research it
Very
because it
nice.
does very important things for your brain.
I would also add that I think I have found that there is a unique outlet in being able to be struck by something and find a way that it ties into the other parts of your life. And that's in many cases, sometimes something for me that will lead to a LinkedIn post or a social media post on one of the other platforms. And I have no idea, 3 minutes before I start writing it, that I'm going to, right? Because it is prompted by something that's happened or something that I've been thinking about. And it's like, oh, the light bulb goes off over my brain. And it's like that. I need to write this down. There's not a lot of profoundness that goes along with that in my view. But I think that's what even these kinds of dynamic conversations that we're having, this is something that helps people to get there too themselves, right? Whatever it is that they're trying to land at. And I have found I've had some really amazing human interactions with people through social media platforms that I may never otherwise have met because something struck me in a moment and I posted something and that led to something else. And, I mean, to some degree, that may be true of my relationship with you, Corey. When I think back, I think one of the first things you ever said to me was something along the lines of, I'm a big fan of you on LinkedIn because I love the way you write. And I was like, are you kidding? And you're like, no, you just really it's the way you're authentic in the way that you say things. And those kinds of connections, whether you're doing it personally, you're journaling, and you use that as part of the way that you form your thinking, which leads you to dynamically discuss things with people, or if you're doing it more publicly, like I sometimes do. I think that the part of it that's so wonderful is how it can bring you something that you never thought you'd get to. And so, Mike, we're all going to be rah-rahing you to write a blog post very soon, or a LinkedIn. I mean, you do some wonderful things with few words on LinkedIn, and I just would say that there is real talent in being able to convey great profoundness in 2 sentences or less. That's something that I struggle with, and you do not. So I just would point that out.
Well, I appreciate that. Don't expect anything else. Right. If I have a really low bar, it's always going to be Matt in terms of my ability to write and to share. So we're coming up on this episode. So I do want to say I'm gonna channel my inner Victor Cardenas, and if you haven't watched the episode, please do. There is a lion costume. There's wardrobe changes. There's an incredible voice that's made for theater. And so I would encourage people to do that. So Corey said something that was great. So yes, hit like, hit subscribe, hit all of those things that people do on social media, but also tell us what you want us to talk about, because I actually, I am the outlier in the world. I don't think that people should come to your boss with solutions, because in a lot of ways, they won't have the context for what the solution ought to be. I want people to come with great questions and the curiosity to engage in what a solution looks like. And I mean that. I am an outlier in that because I don't think right? The answer is never blue, right? The answer is in how do you get to blue? Because the richness comes in the learning that comes with that whole process. So, if you I'm genuine serious. Send us questions, send us topics, send us things that you want us to explore. Fair warning, we might just invite you to be a guest because we'll do that too.
We sure will.
Well, and I think that's perfect. We were blessed to have 3 amazing guests that went on the journey of teaching us how to be hosts to guests, because it's one thing for us to learn how to work together, and then when you add another person in. And so what an amazing first 3 in Charlene, Tanya, and Victor we were blessed to have. And I look forward to some of our upcoming guests who are just going to be so exciting and extraordinary. And if you've made it this far with us, thank you for hanging out with us. And as Mike said, just send us whatever. Share. We want feedback, like genuinely, good, bad, and how to get better.